sabrinasalvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. Doobie-doobie-doo. 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 I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati.
We need to pay attention and learn from the workers protesting in France right now over the pension reform implemented by President Macron. The French realize that their real enemy is the oligarchs, not their neighbor, not their co-worker, not their friend who may share different political views. We need to do the same. I've been calling for a general strike for quite some time because I believe this is the only way our government will actually listen to us. Neither political party is protecting the workers. Both parties protect corporate interests. But without our labor, this country will not function. Our government realizes this, and this is exactly why they prevented the railroad workers from going on strike. We need to start a working class movement, not just in this country, but in other countries as well. It is time to shut the billionaires down. It is time for an international working class movement. And as Shama Sawant would say, it is time for workers to strike back. Thank you.
Welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I am your host, Sabrina Salvati. Guys, yes, that was part of my speech yesterday from the May Day rally here in Boston. If you want to see the full speech, you'll have to check that out on Revolutionary Blackout Network. Since RBN sponsored the event, the actual event, the whole stream and the speeches are on RBN. So check that out if you haven't had a chance to see that. But welcome to Sabby Sabs podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. If you are new, I want to let you know that Sabby Sabs podcast is a part of Revolutionary Blackout Network. You can catch me there on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And you can catch me here on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Sunday. Shout out to everyone watching on YouTube, Rockfin, and Twitter. And welcome, guys. Welcome back. Yes, it is great to be back. We do have a special guest that's coming on later on tonight. I look forward to talking to him. We're going to get into that discussion there about this legislation that Matt Gaetz had to pull U.S. troops out of Somalia. And I think you're going to want to hear what he has to say. So I'm looking forward to that. I want to go ahead and start off by giving shout outs to people in the chat, and then we'll go ahead and dive on in. Shout out to Joey, says, booze who? Greetings, Hannah G says, hi, Sabby. What's going on? Eric, who's a Sabby member, says, good evening, all. Shout out to Lawrence, who's also a Sabby member, says, doobie doobie door 2024. Greetings, Joe says, all right, quiet on the set, roll opening credits and action. Greetings, Oz says, international working class movement. Yes, that is key. That is very important. It cannot just happen in the United States. Greetings, Dr. Nick says, hi, everybody. What's going on? Notori sends fire and love. Greetings, Hugo, who's a Sabby member, says, Scooby-Dooby-Doo. What's going on? Angela, who's also a Sabby member, says, greetings and happy Tuesday. Shout out to Bryce, says, Sabby Sabs time. What's going on? Where he says, hey, everybody. Greetings, Gala, who is a Sabby member, says, go Sabby. Shout out to Rick, says, hey, y'all. Greetings, Nikolai, says, fire, love, Sabby. What's going on? The Oracle says, girl, you had better say all of that. Yeah, had some things to say yesterday. Shout out to Ryan says, Sabby, killing it. Thank you so much, Ryan. Greetings, Dana says, that was great, Sabby. Now, I'm not going to go on for too much longer because I do want to make sure I stay on time because I do have the guest coming on at 8:30. But let's go ahead and shout out Sabby patrons as well. Thank you guys so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. If you are interested in being a Sabby patron, I have 5 categories: members, Sabbies, Sabsters, Sabinators, and of course, the ultimate. All of their names are listed here. You can see them scrolling across the bottom of the screen there at the ticker as well. And I want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. Let's go ahead and give it up for Data Leaf, or Data, however you choose to pronounce it, Data or Data. And let's give it up for Shirley Davis in the house. Thank you guys so much for your support. Really do appreciate all of that jazz. That's right. That's right. All right, let's go ahead and show that beautiful thumbnail and let's see what we are going to discuss tonight. Tonight will be pretty interesting, and we are doing call-in tonight, and I'm sure you guys will have some things to say about these stories. Tonight, we are discussing Noam Chomsky and Jeffrey Epstein alarm. If you haven't heard that story by now, you're going to hear it tonight. Oh, talk about a shocker there. We're also going to discuss RFK Jr. and Joe Biden. Oops. What did Joe Biden do? And what does it have to do with RFK Jr.? So that's going to be an interesting discussion. We're also going to discuss France, May Day, and you can see that picture there of Macron. He is not happy. We're going to talk about what went down in France yesterday. If you want to talk about a serious May Day protest, we're going to get into all of that. And we're also going to discuss Matt Gaetz fail in reference to Somalia legislation and pulling troops out of Somalia. And I do have a guest coming on to discuss that with me as well. Start us off right by hitting the like. That helps me with the algorithm. So thank you very much. And we're going to go ahead and dive right into this story about the May Day protests in France, which took place yesterday. Now, May Day, also known as International Workers' Day, happens all across the globe. Like, this is not just something that happened here in the US. And there were several protests that took place, but there was one protest in particular that really, you cannot hold a candle to this. And that was the protest that took place in France yesterday. The numbers are outrageous. The number of people that they had come out, the events that took place. And yes, the people in France are still angry about Macron increasing the retirement age and his adjustment to the pension reform. And they are not going down without a fight. And I want everybody to pay close attention to this because we've been covering these protests since the very beginning. But I want you to see it is now weeks later and the French people are not quitting. They're not giving up. And yesterday, these protests actually were even bigger. This is from Pelham. Says, France, this is absolutely epic. This is a revolution. Resist. I want you to see the numbers of people that came out. Look at the crowd. Notice you can't tell where it begins and where it ends. You cannot tell where this line begins and where it ends. That is a serious protest. But there's more, because so much happened yesterday that I honestly was like, I had so many video clips to choose from. And there's actually a friend of the show who sent me multiple clips as well. And I was just like, I don't even know how to pick from because there's so much that happened, right? Well, you know, the media was going to cover this. They couldn't avoid it this time. not with the numbers of people that came out and not with some of the actions that happened. I want to show you two examples. The first example is from the BBC, and I want you to listen to the way that they discuss these protests. Of course, the title says May Day rallies turn violent. Listen to this.
Well, it's become an all too familiar scene on the streets of Paris. Protesters dressed all in black, police armed with riot shields, tear gas and barricades, running battles taking place down the boulevards of the French capital. Well, it's happening again, and this time on May Day, a mostly peaceful demonstration against President Macron's controversial reforms of the pension system, marred once more by scenes of violence. Well, these are scenes and pictures you're seeing live now of police firing water cannon at protesters. Tensions are particularly high today because a lot of the unions, the top 8 unions in France, have got together and called for people to come to the streets. It's the first time that's happened since 2009.
Notice that she said there were 8 unions that came together. And this is what I want to see happen in the United States. I want different unions to come together and collaborate with each other and create a mass strike, a mass protest. That is the way. In the words of the Mandalorian, this is the way. This really is. You have to put aside, we have to put aside the egos. We have to put aside like, well, that's not my company. We need to put that aside. And these unions need to come together. This has not happened since 2009 in France. Notice that your numbers are a lot larger when you choose to do that.
Also, of course, tensions are high because this is just 2 weeks since the French President Macron signed through the latest pension reforms, which mean that the retirement age in France now goes up from 62 to 64. People in France are unhappy, and there is also some element of rancor and unhappiness, if you like, felt towards the French President Macron. A little earlier, I spoke to our Europe correspondent Nick Beek, who gave me the very latest from Paris.
What you can see behind me is the official route, the trade union organised march. The blue of one particular trade union making their way along this particular route. We're about halfway to the final point, but just here a few moments ago it descended in tear gas because the police clashed with some of the hardcore here, the so-called black bloc. And what we saw was various things being destroyed, bus shelters being broken, and the police on horseback had to come in at quite speed, and we saw these clashes. Already we've heard that about 30 people at least have been arrested. That figure's going up all the time. And so we do have this sort of two tales within one city, actually. So you've got the families on the official route, but also maybe hundreds of people who have already clashed with the police just an hour or so into this demonstration.
This is pretty much the equivalent of what the group in the U.S. People refer to as Antifa. This is kind of the equivalent to that group in some way, shape, or form, the people that are in black. But notice that he said 30 people at that point in time, 30 people were arrested. That's nothing compared to the number of people that were arrested during the George Floyd protest here in the United States. So that number is relatively low. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? Why is it that the police in France, even though they're pouring water on them, they're hosing them down with water, they have tear gas, etc. Why is it that they arrested fewer people than police will arrest in the United States when we have a protest, right? That's something I really want you to think about. Let's go on a little bit more.
And Nick, do we know which sections of the protesters were the ones that clashed with police? Do we have any more information?
Yeah, it was the people who were dressed all in black, some of them covering their faces. They were right at the...
See, the people all in black. So it kind of reminds me of Antifa a little bit.
The head of the march of the protest route, and so they filed off from one side to another into the different boulevards and streets of the capital here, while all the while mostly the families here were able to make their way through. I mean, this is something we see week in, week out in these protests over the past 4 months or so, but also in previous May Days there has been clashes between the police. I think today there is the added fire, the added anger because of the pension reform that people have been on the streets protesting about for 4 months now, and this real anger at President Macron. If you talk to people here, he comes in for a lot of personal animosity, lots of people holding placards depicting his face, because he was the one as president who was able to push through this pension reform that increases the state retirement age from 62 to 64. There was no vote in Parliament, so a lot of people here, their anger was just augmented, was exacerbated by this, and that's being reflected in the streets today. Not so much at this particular place. You can probably hear the drums and quite a sort of carnival atmosphere, but it really just changes like that, and the violence can be quite quick, intense. 5,000 police on the streets of Paris today, and we've seen a lot of them, and they are sort of marauding around, or I'm sure they wouldn't put it like that, but they are hanging back, waiting for hotspots, and then they do come in, as we know, the French police, really quickly.
Now, I'm going to show you a video about what else happened with the police in just a second, because there was at one point where the police were actually not as successful. We're going to get into that in just a second. But what I want to point out to you is something that he said about how long these protests have been going on. He said this has been happening for 4 months now. But you have to understand, if you're new to this, that President Macron actually chose to increase the retirement age on his own. This is similar to what our president would do in reference to an executive order, right? So the members, the other politicians, did not vote on this. This was something that he did on his own. And I've explained this to you before, that he's a former financial investor. So he is there to protect the corporate powers that be. This is where he comes from. He was a banker. And you have to also understand that BlackRock is also connected to this. This is why these protesters stormed BlackRock, because they knew that they were a part of this pension reform. So it's all connected. You always have to follow it back to the money. It's not like Macron just woke up one day and said, yeah, I don't think we can afford to do this anymore. No, he is protecting the banks. He is protecting the corporate powers that be, even if that means that the French people are going to have to work longer. But that was the background that he came from. So people need to pay attention to things like that. When you have someone, you vote for someone in as president, and they're a former financial investor, 9 times out of 10, he was put there for a reason. And the reason is not to fight for you. The reason is to fight for the corporate powers. That's what that is for. Now, shout out to Case Study QB, because I want to show you another version of how these events are described. So Case Study QB says mass protest in France to protest increase in retirement age as workers threaten to turn off electricity on the French Open. So this is huge.
It's been a violent day in France. Some demonstrators clashing with police in protests over the nation's new plan to raise the retirement age, and now threatening to disrupt world-famous events like the French Open.
We're going to go back here because I want to show you a narrative that mainstream media continues to say over and over, not just with this protest, but other protests as well. Listen to this.
It's been a violent day in France. Some demonstrators clashing with police in...
That part right there, clashing with police. The BBC just said that. He just said that. They've said this with the Black Lives Matter protests. Notice how it's always the protesters or the demonstrators clashing with the police, and it's never the police clash with the protesters and the demonstrators. Even at some of these peaceful protests, we've seen video footage of this where there have been peaceful protests where police officers have come in and broken up the peaceful protests. During the George Floyd protests, there was video footage of one protest in particular where it was very peaceful. They had a table set up of bottled water and food, and police officers showed up and threw the food on the ground. But it's never police clash with the protesters, according to mainstream media. It is always the protesters clash with the police. I want you to pay attention to the way that they frame things.
Protests over the nation's new plan to raise the retirement age, and now threatening to disrupt world-famous events like the French Open. Richard Engel is there.
Hundreds of thousands today took to the streets across France to protest against working more. They're trying to force President Emmanuel Macron to reverse a new, deeply unpopular law, raising the retirement age from 62 to 64.
So he said that they're trying to force President Macron to reverse his decision on the retirement age. Notice they don't say President Macron is trying to force them to work longer. It's all about the framing. Like, I want to reframe things because when they frame it that way, it gives the public the impression that the protesters are the problem, that they're the ones that are at fault. So the way that you frame it is very important.
A change made without a vote in Parliament and approved by the highest court here. More than 100 policemen were injured, 20 hospitalized in Paris alone. So the police have been charging through here, and the protesters have been pushing them back, kicking them, throwing stones at them. And now there's too much tear gas here. Most of the protesters were far from retirement age. Some critics say that people in France are being unrealistic, that you need to work more, and that they're lazy, frankly.
Did you hear what he just said? Listen to what he says. This is very telling about mainstream media.
Need to work more, and that they're lazy, frankly.
Some people are saying that you need to work more and that you're lazy. Isn't that sad the way he frames that? You need to work more. Just because you're working until you're 62 and not until you're 64, that doesn't mean you're not necessarily working more. You could be working longer hours. For people who have 2 jobs, for example, how does he know if they're working more or not? So again, this is another phrase that is used to demonize the protesters instead of President Macron. Another thing they said right before this, I think is important too, that they're not even at retirement age. Listen to this.
Too much tear gas here. Most of the protesters were far from retirement age.
Folks at the protesters were far from retirement age. So what? So what? So only the people that should be protesting are the people that are close to that retirement age? If that's the case, when you look at the protests like the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter protests, if they have that rhetoric, are they saying then, if you look at those particular protests, that the only people that should be out there protesting in reference to George Floyd and Black Lives Matter are Black people, that the white people shouldn't be out there with them as they were? We have to start asking these questions in reference to mainstream media. It doesn't matter if they're close to the retirement age or not. They're there standing in solidarity with the people who are. And that is what is important.
Some critics say that people in France are being unrealistic, that you need to work more, and that they're lazy, frankly. What do you say to that?
We don't want to be like the American people at 80 years old, have to work, and this is not a life. It's not a life.
The government argues demographics are killing early retirement. People are living longer and have fewer children to keep the system going.
People are living longer and having fewer children to keep the system going. You hear what they're trying to tell you? You guys aren't having kids anymore, so you can work longer. As if you're not supposed to have a life. So they're trying to punish people because they're not having kids.
The demonstrators don't buy it and say they'll keep fighting for a work-life balance that's slipping away. Labor unions say they will cut the electricity to the upcoming Cannes Film Festival and the French Open if the law isn't repealed. Lester?
Richard Engel in Paris tonight. Thank you.
And it's interesting. Yes, they want to cut the electricity to the French Open. Have at it. Have at it. What's more important, the French Open or the workers? Mainstream media will frame this to let you know that, well, the French Open may not happen. Oh my gosh, this is terrible. So what? So what? So you don't have it 1 year. Big deal. Stand with the workers. Stand in solidarity with the workers. The firefighters in France have chosen to stand in solidarity with the workers. Now, this is from Bernie's tweets. I told you guys to follow her on Twitter because she's capturing a lot of the footage from the protests. So here you have the firefighters. Even they know what's up. right. They are there in solidarity because the thing is, they're workers too. It's not like, they're not affected. Now, this particular clip here is the one I was telling you about in reference to the police. Now, you'll see that the police will come in to storm the protesters, but then something happens. Things start to change. So the police, they're attacking the protesters. But now look, notice, they're starting to back away. Why are they backing away? Watch this. You see that? The protesters, they came prepared. They knew the police would show up at some point. So the protesters are choosing to fight back at the police. And there's more protesters than there are police. And that's why the police have to back up. And I continue to say this. There are way more of us than there are of them. Why do you think they're trying to build Cop City in Atlanta? Because they want to ramp up the police state so that the protests that we saw, the George Floyd protests, they want to make it so that if something happens like that again in this country, and I think our government knows it's coming. I think our government knows that that is just the tip of the iceberg, that eventually the people are going to rise up in mass, whether it's a police brutality issue or not, because the American people are fed up. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to ramp up the police state, whether it's with militarized police force or militarized police equipment, so that they can push us back. That is why they're building Cop City in Atlanta. It's not just to curb crime. It's to prevent those mass protests from happening again. There they go, further back. They're pushing them back. And they have shields. And they have to walk back. Yeah. And just like that, they had to back away. Now, someone just asked a question here in the chat. They said, why aren't the pigs changing sides? That's a good question. Because they're workers as well. But remember, they are also there to protect capital. The police are there to protect capital, which means protecting President Macron, which means protecting businesses like BlackRock. When they stormed the BlackRock headquarters, they are there to protect capital. They protect wealth. They're not there to protect the working class for the most part. So what you see happening in France, this is the type of movement that we need to happen in the United States. And for people who say we can't do it, we don't have the numbers, I don't buy that, because I saw the numbers during the George Floyd protests all across this country, across the world. Anytime you had people in South Korea also protesting. So don't tell me that we don't have the numbers. We need a working class movement, just as I said in that speech earlier, and it needs to come from all the countries. It can't just happen in the US. It has to be an international worker movement, because workers are exploited all across the globe, not just in the United States. So that's what people have to understand. I think that is especially key. I'm going to go to some of the comments here, but shout out in solidarity with the workers in France, because they did not come to play. Thank you for the super sticker, John T. Scott says, who does the system serve? Right. It doesn't serve the working class. That's for sure. And thank you for the super chat, Dr. Nick, because they are exempt from the changes. Fire too. He's talking about in reference to the police. Now, there was another one that someone sent me. Let me go back because I want to show you. They actually put it in this thread. There was one more clip. Let me just go here. It was a friend of the show. Let me see if I can find it. Thought it was closer to the top. Yeah. this one. Sending you some French energy. She sent it to me, but I don't see. I'll go to her page. Give me just a second because she sent me something really quick. I'm trying to. It was another video that she tagged me in. And see, I don't look at my mentions sometimes, so I'm just like, oh, I did not see this. Oh, shoot. I don't know if I can find it, but shoot balls. I knew I should have just went ahead and saved it when I saw it, but now I don't see it. Darn. Oh, is this it? Yes, the students. I want to show this one as well. Sorry about that, guys. I want you to see this clip here about the students because this one is important as well. My bad on that, guys. I'm usually more organized, but listen to this. So this particular clip here, Jeremy said, I met up with high school students in Paris as they joined the workers who've been protesting against Macron's neoliberal reforms, which he rammed through via 49.3, an anti-democratic weapon that allows him to bypass the French people and the parliament. Take a listen to this. Even some of the high school students join.
They don't care about the people. They don't care about the opinion of the people.
I think we need a volume booster on this one, Eric.
Yellow jackets, they didn't listen, and they need to listen. Like it should be the government that is afraid of the people, not the people that is afraid of the government. But that's what is happening with the protest. Like they don't care about the people. They don't care about the opinion of the people. It's the main problem. Like there was the yellow jackets, they didn't listen. And
yep,
they need to listen. Like it should be the government that is afraid of the people, not the people that is afraid of the people. It's the main problem.
Did you hear what he said? It should be that the government is afraid of the people, not the people afraid of the government. This is a teenager. He's in high school. Like he gets it. Let's go on a little bit.
Like there was the yellow jackets, they didn't listen, and they need to listen. Like it should be the government that is afraid of the people, not the people that is afraid of the government. But that's what is happening with the protest. Like the cops are fucking violent. I got a friend who got shot with a rubber bullet in the head, then beat up by the police. Yeah. And I myself have been arrested very violently in a protest, and I know people who got arrested. The cops are not here to keep order. They are here just to protect the government.
That's right. That's right. So thank you so much for that. That was the one I was looking for that I wanted you to hear. Teenager. He gets it. He gets it. Let me know if there's anything on Rockfin, Eric. I'll go to that, and then I'll go ahead and get started with the next story. But he understands. We got to wake more people up. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with our next story, which is RFK Jr. might be giving Joe Biden a little bit of a problem. A little bit of a problem. And here's the thing. It's Joe Biden's fault. It's his own fault because of something that the Democratic Party decided to do that's actually looks like it could work against him, not in his favor. Now, if you are not aware, it was announced that the Biden administration has taken upon to young people to push Biden's 2024 run on TikTok. Now, this video has been trending like crazy. I'm going to show you two Gen Z TikTokeroos, whatever you want to call them, how they are trying to pump up other young people to vote for Joe Biden in 2024. They're trying to, hey, here's two young people, other young people, listen to them. They're trying to use that method. And then a friend of mine made a parody of this video. So let me show you the original video first because this was too funny to me. And I know a lot of people are making fun of this already. Gen Z, this is what they're trying to do. They're trying to get you to come out and vote for Biden. They're trying to use your own demographic against you. Listen to this.
What the Republican Party doesn't understand about Gen Z is we don't like you. You claim you want to appeal to Gen Z, but you call us stupid, you say we're dumb, you say we're indoctrinated. I promise it's a losing strategy. And Gen Z is watching the Republican Party extremely closely as they destroy our environment, take rights away from women, do nothing about kids being shot in schools, and if they think they can give the middle finger to our generation and get away with it, they're sorely mistaken. What the Republican Party doesn't understand about Gen Z is we don't like you.
Okay, so hold on to that, right? So he's calling out the Republican Party, okay? Now, some of the things that he mentioned or they mentioned in reference to the Republican Party, yes, I agree to the person in the comment. I think these guys are actors. Some of those things can apply to the Democratic Party as well. And so a friend of mine, Big Mad Crab, you got to give him props for this. I couldn't believe he did this. He's a part of Indie News Network. So he said Gen Z won't sit back and watch as the Democratic Party tries to destroy the country. He said, had to use my white boy powers for good. Listen to this. This is too funny.
Democratic Party doesn't understand about Gen Z is that we don't like you. Claim you want to appeal to Gen Z, but you call us stupid.
What else do we know about this population, 18 through 24? They are stupid.
You call us privileged.
The younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break.
I promise you, it's a losing strategy. Gen Z is watching the Democratic Party extremely closely as they continue to approve drilling contracts, refuse to codify a role into law, and blow up major energy pipelines. And if they think they can give the middle finger to our generation and get away with it, they're sorely mistaken. Democratic Party doesn't understand about...
Eric, can you do it again? Can you do volume boost? Because there's some parts that I want to pause at. It's kind of funny.
Democratic Party doesn't understand about Gen Z is that we don't like you. Claim you want to appeal to Gen Z, but you call...
Thanks. This is funny. And Big Mad Crab is in the chat. I just saw him a second ago. I don't know where he went.
Democratic Party doesn't understand about Gen Z is that we don't like you. Claim you want to appeal to Gen Z, but you call us stupid.
What else do we know about this population, 18 through 24? They are stupid.
Some of the same criticisms that those two guys had for the Republican Party. This is what I was saying. The Democratic Party has done this as well. So shout out to Big Mad Crab for catching this, because I was like, oh man, here he is. Big Mad Crab's in the chat. This is him in the video, but this was hilarious. Let's go back in.
You call us privileged?
The younger generation now tells me how tough things are. Give me a break.
I remember Joe Biden making that comment. I remember that.
I promise you, it's a losing strategy. Gen Z is watching Democratic...
Look at him flexing in the background. This is too funny.
Democratic Party extremely closely as they continue to approve drilling contracts, refuse to codify a role into law, and blow up major energy pipelines. And if they think they can give the middle finger to our generation and get away with it, they're sorely mistaken.
Look at this. I'm sorry, but notice he just called out the things that the Democratic Party is doing now that is going to hurt the Gen Z generation, right? The oil drilling, the Willow Project, not codifying Roe v. Wade into law. So that's what I was saying. What they said about the Republican Party, those things can also be applied to the Democratic Party as well.
Again, Democratic Party doesn't understand about Gen Z is that we...
So yeah, it's a... So why am I showing you that video besides the fact that it's hilarious? Because it appears that Joe Biden may have made a mistake. A while back, I told you that the Democratic Party had decided to make South Carolina the first primary state for 2024. And they said that their reason for that is the fact that there's more diversity there. And I called BS and I said that if it was about diversity, then states like Georgia or Maryland or New Jersey, which are more diverse, those states would have been number one. But it wasn't about that. It was about the fact that South Carolina was the state that changed the race for Joe Biden in 2020 and put him on top. So that's what this is really about. Well, in doing that, what he did was demote New Hampshire and Iowa. And we can argue about whether or not we feel Iowa or New Hampshire is diverse. Obviously, there's a different demographic there. But this is all about political play here. This was a game that they're trying to play to make sure that a weak, declined Joe Biden could be reelected. Doesn't look like this is going to work in his favor. Let's get into this article here. Why Biden may have to forfeit the first contest in his reelection bid to Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. Here we go. President Biden just announced his reelection campaign, but he's already on track to sacrifice New Hampshire's famed primary to a fringe rival like Marianne Williamson or RFK Jr. Look at what they're doing. I told you, this is a typical establishment media talking points. They're all using similar vocabulary. They're all using that word fringe to refer to other candidates. The unusual situation is one of Biden's own making. Thanks to the new primary calendar, the Democratic National Committee ratified at his behest in February, which seeks to demote Iowa and New Hampshire and prohibits candidates from campaigning or even putting their name on the ballot in a state that jumps the line. Here's the problem. New Hampshire and Iowa, both of which Biden lost in 2020, plan to disregard the DNC and hold their contest first anyway. Let me say this again. New Hampshire and Iowa plan to disregard the DNC and hold their contest first anyway, most likely forcing Biden to forfeit the first unofficial contest of 2020. So when the Democratic Party decided to make that change in reference to the order of the primary states, turns out New Hampshire and Iowa didn't like that too much. And this is their way of clapping back, so to speak. So the joke could be on Joe Biden. Now let's go on. The rules apply to Williamson and Kennedy as well, but they've indicated they're willing to accept the DNC's unspecified penalties for rule violations since they're running anti-establishment campaigns anyway. While those contests will most likely be insequential to the delegate math of Biden's renomination, it may, nothing less, be embarrassing for the president of the United States to nominally lose to Williamson, a self-help author who has never held elective office, or Kennedy, an anti-jab activist with a famous last name. See how they're smearing them? They keep doing this, right? And even though I don't approve anymore of this process of trying to put progressive through the Democratic Party, that doesn't mean that the media should get a pass with what they're doing. They are the only other Democrats in the race at the moment. While Biden's campaign would likely shrug off the outcome of contests it didn't even compete in, the situation could be nerve-wracking for ever anxious Democrats and spark new questions about a bigger name Democrat to challenge Biden. So let me tell you how they revealed themselves here, right? They were completely against Joe Biden having a challenger, right? Joe Biden gets two challengers. They're even more against it. But now, because of this mess up that the Democratic Party has done, now they're actually willing to maybe be on board with a larger name. I'm going to add this word in there, establishment Democrat to challenge Joe Biden. You see how this works? It's about who they think is going to serve the status quo. And whoever is going to maintain the status quo and is not going to push back against the status quo, they will get behind that candidate. This has less to do with protecting Joe Biden and more to do with protecting the status quo in this country and protecting corporate America. This has to do with protecting the military-industrial complex, protecting those powers that be. That is why all you have to do, if you swap out Biden with Joe Manchin, if you swap out Biden with Pete Buttigieg, they would get on board behind that too, because these are establishment corporate Democrats that are not going to push the envelope. And that's what they like. We still intend to have a presidential primary that will be first in the nation, says New Hampshire Secretary of State David Scanlon. Whether the president's campaign here or not is up to him. It's up to him whether he's going to place his name on the ballot or not. If he chooses not to place his name on the ballot, I'm sure there will be some New Hampshire Democratic voters who will write his name in. The new Democratic calendar moves up South Carolina, the state that revived Biden's candidacy in 2020, and demoted Iowa, where Biden finishes fourth, and New Hampshire, where he was fifth. And this is what I've said before, and I will continue to say. They can change the rules at any time. Next week, they could come back and say, we changed our mind. We're moving Iowa and New Hampshire back up. This is the thing about the DNC. They don't play fair. They don't play fair. They're ruthless, and they'll do whatever they can to back and promote the candidate. And I'm going to use this term that Kim gave me, that is bankrolled. Typically, the candidate that has the most money from the donors from corporate America, that's who they'll get behind. That's how it works with the DNC. The party said that New Hampshire could share the second slot with Nevada, but the state balked, citing a law mandating that its primary take place a week before any other in the country. So basically, New Hampshire was like, I'm not trying to share my food with Nevada. We are not sharing a sandwich. The sandwich is mine. You get your own sandwich and you come back the following week. They wanted them to share a spot. Share. A Biden campaign aide said advisors are aware that New Hampshire might jump the line and hope it does not, but are prepared to abide to any sanctions the DNC would impose if that were to happen. And then here you go. You got the DNC ready to implement sanctions on these states for trying to do what they have been doing before. Iowa, meanwhile, was jettisoned entirely from Democrats' early primary window, but that was expected after the fiasco of its 2020 caucuses in the state trending more red. New Hampshire Democrats, on the other hand, were shocked and outraged by the snub, warning it will undermine the party in the critical general election swing state. New Hampshire, my neighbor to the north. It's an interesting state. New Hampshire can be a mixed bag. And I've said this before. You think you know what they're going to do, and then they surprise you. Their motto is live free or die. So the fact that the Democratic Party actually thought that New Hampshire would take this sitting down and not push back or not try to fight back, they are obviously not aware with how voters actually feel in the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire's largest union announced Tuesday that it is not endorsing Biden, saying New Hampshire voters deserve a competitive Democratic primary. The prospect of a relatively easy win in either state could be enticing to an ambitious Democrat and has been a factor in both Williamson and Kennedy's campaign strategy. So this quote here from Marianne Williamson, your primary is going to happen on schedule. So whether or not the president participates, this is where it's going to happen. Kennedy, whose family hails from neighboring Massachusetts, has repeatedly appealed to New Hampshire Democrats aggrieved by the snub, writing open letters and op-eds defending the state's primary. They have all kinds of, tricks up their sleeve. But there's this article here from Time that I want you to hear, because in reference to this issue with RFK Jr. and Joe Biden, I think there's something that you need to hear. Now, we all know, let's be realistic, the DNC is not going to give RFK Jr. the nomination. They're not going to give Marianne Williamson the nomination. They'll do whatever they can do to change the rules so that it doesn't happen. This is also why I believe people should run as independent. But that doesn't mean that RFK Jr. could not cause issues for Joe Biden. And let me explain to you why. This article here by the Time, how RFK Jr. could lose badly, but still throw Biden off his game. Here we go. I'm actually going to make this just a little bit larger because thank you. Thank you. President Joe Biden closed out his first week as an official 2024 candidate with plenty of reasons to feel good about the launch. On the eve of his declaration, he met with the so-called Tennessee Three for a photo op. Yes, because that's exactly all it was, just a photo op that reminded Black voters of the White House efforts to protect democracy and encourage younger votes. Okay, whatever. Let's go on down here. Biden world may be riding high, but there is one nagging nuisance that has the potential to do more damage than they may appreciate. 2 weeks ago, RFK Jr., the son of the 1968 presidential hopeful and nephew of the 35th president, why didn't they just say their names? This part really threw me. Why didn't you just say, why did they just say the son of Robert F. Kennedy and the nephew of JFK? Why didn't they just say that? Anyway, announced his plans to win the White House. Most serious Democrats have dismissed Kennedy as an inconvenience whose past flirtation with jab misinformation would eventually prove disqualifying. Notice how they say most serious, because apparently if you're challenging Joe Biden to his left, you're not considered serious. Those sage insiders are probably correct in their diagnosis. Only one incumbent elected president has ever lost renomination, and that was Franklin Pierce in 1852. 4 other vice presidents who rose to president had been denied the nomination in their own right. And that last time that happened was 1884. That was President Lyndon Baines Johnson's 1968 bid, and his presidency really effectively ended after he had a shaky showing in New Hampshire's primary. There goes New Hampshire again. See, they're bringing that back up. But past serious challengers have proven popular enough to throw incumbent presidents off their game. Former California Governor Ronald Reagan in 1976 primaried incumbent President Gerald Ford, who got the job only when Richard Nixon resigned. Senator Edward M. Kennedy, RFK Jr.'s uncle, primaried Jimmy Carter 4 years later. Why? Ted? We call him Ted. The fuck is Edward? Sorry. Excuse me. Ted Kennedy. Maybe his full name is Edward, but we call him Ted. Ted Kennedy primary challenged Jimmy Carter. Anyway, and in 1992, activist Pat Buchanan tried to take out President George H.W. Bush. All of those challengers failed, but exposed intra-party divisions that helped to make each incumbent a one-term president. Listen to this piece. Now, at least at this point, RFK Jr. is no Reagan, who won 24 primaries against Ford and amassed about 46% of the vote. But amid Biden's listless support within his own party, polling shows Kennedy hitting double digits. In fact, polls consistently show Democrats don't want Biden, the oldest person ever to do the job, to seek a second term. If reelected, Biden would leave office at age 86. A stunning 52% of Democrats told AP NORC pollsters Biden should not run again. And among all voters, that sentiment reaches 73%. The findings are in line with other surveys. And in there, this inconvenient fact, Biden himself is effectively barred from competing in Iowa and New Hampshire, which I just told you about. Let's go on down here. Nothing less. On Tuesday, Biden made his plans official. The slick online video and subsequent comments didn't change voters' minds, at least not yet in public surveys or private chats in Washington. RFK Jr.'s standing in Fox News poll shows him on the eve of Biden's entrance at a staggering 19%. Hardly enough at this point to do any real damage to Biden, but sufficient to be a piece of gravel in Biden's loafers. Let me just add in here for a second. There was another poll, which I showed on the show a couple days ago, the Emerson poll, which came out after that Fox News poll, which actually had RFK Jr., I believe, at 21%. So he was even higher. It was either 21 or 24%, if I remember correctly. But what we have to remember, even though they're saying that 19% is hardly enough to do anything at this point, just remember that even Bernie Sanders was not polling at that percent. Not at this point. So just keep that in mind. Now let's go on a little bit more. Now the fact that roughly 1 in 4 Democrats are pulling for someone other than Biden doesn't matter all that much on its own. But it may be an early sign of troubles to come, even if RFK Jr. never poses a serious threat to Biden securing the party's nomination. Kennedy does his best among women, white women, specifically, and a nagging 15% of people who voted for Biden in 2020 are now backing his upstart challenger. Listen to how they refer to the people who voted for Biden but don't support him anymore. They call them nags. They're nagging. Nagging. You know, they're a thorn in the DNC side. How dare you have a difference of opinion? How dare you want someone else? How dare you support another person running in this race instead of the incumbent president? When the Democratic Party talks about democracy, the idea of democracy that they have is you shut up, you do what we tell you to do, and you vote for the Democratic Party. And you only vote for establishment Democrats. You don't put your support behind progressive Democrats, anyone further than progressive Democrats. You put your support and your energy behind the establishment, status quo, milk toast candidate. So their idea of democracy is not this freedom or this right that you're supposed to have to vote for who you want. Their idea of democracy is for you to be quiet and do what they tell you to do. Because if it was really about you voting for who you wanted, then you would be able to vote for independent and third-party candidates in an easier way instead of them having to fight to get on the ballot. If it was really about real democracy. Protest votes don't really matter in politics until they do. Even after Hillary Clinton earned enough delegates to become the nominee in 2016, highlight earned. Did she really earn all those delegates? Did she really earn all those super delegates? When Bernie Sanders won every county in West Virginia and they gave West Virginia to her, the super delegates did? Question the word earned. Enough delegates to become the nominee in 2016, Bernie Sanders supporters continued to cast ballots for him. How dare they? How dare you? How dare you not vote for the candidate the super delegates told you to vote for? This is what it's really about. I see your comment too, Jay. How dare you voice your opinion? Exactly. How dare you? The nerve of these people. And one caucuses in Montana and North Dakota and still racked up between 21% and 49% of the votes in 5 other contests, even after it was obvious the nomination was not his. So what? They kill me with this. They kill me with this. Oh, dear God. Clinton to these days believes that how Sanders chose to wind up his own campaign and back hers ultimately cost her votes in the general. See how they just lie? Clinton, till this day, believes that how Sanders chose to wind down his own campaign and back hers ultimately cost her votes in the general. How many times have I showed you the video on the show of Bernie Sanders telling his supporters to support Hillary Clinton after it was all done? How many times I showed you that video when he was in Philadelphia and he said, we got to back Hillary Clinton because we can't get Donald Trump. And he was booed. His supporters booed him. The Times article here is actually going to pretend like Bernie Sanders didn't go around this country trying to help Hillary Clinton win. And Hillary Clinton still does that too, by the way. She's still talking about that. She's a sore loser. 8 years before she lost to Trump, Clinton's earlier White House bid continued to pick up support 42% in Montana, 55% in South Dakota, 68% in Puerto Rico, even after it was clear she couldn't earn the majority of pledged delegates. But her convincing endorsement of Barack Obama took the sour grapes out of enough of her loyalists to help Obama win and her to become his top diplomat. That's because she was next in line to run. That's because Hillary Clinton is the status quo. She's a part of the status quo. She's a Goldman Sachs candidate. She is the DNC's dream. So of course she's going to play by the rules. Of course she told people to go ahead and get behind Barack Obama because she knew she'd be next in line. You go ahead, Barack, and I'll come in right after you. I pat your back, you pat my back next go round. Isn't that what happened? Didn't she come in after? She ran after, right? Boy, I tell you. There are plenty other examples of protest votes amounting to early warning signs, though. In 2004, John Kerry effectively captured the nomination on March 11th before 21 contests had even been held. Kerry continued with the pro-forma march, picking up between 27% in rival John Edwards' home turf of North Carolina. I remember that. And even on the final day of balloting, only 92% in New Jersey, where Dennis Kucinich had an oddball base. Yeah, they have to be odd. Why do they have to be odd? You see how this works? So what they're trying to get to is this. Even though I told you the DNC is not going to let RFK Jr. become the nominee, even if that does not happen, what they're afraid of is that he may garner enough support and that his supporters may do what some of the Bernie supporters did and not show up and back Joe Biden in the end. And if that happens, then the Republican nominee could actually win. That's what happened in 2016, and Trump won. But I don't blame the Bernie supporters. I blame the fact that Hillary Clinton did not choose to speak to people in the Rust Belt. She did not choose to seek the needs of the working class people in this country. She was also very prudish. She was such a prude. We called them deplorables. You know, this snobby, elitist, snarky, Goldman Sachs standard candidate does not speak to the average working class person in this country. You don't. You speak for people like you and people who hang out with you. And that was a turnoff. That was a turnoff, not just to Bernie supporters, but to some people who honestly didn't care which way or another and were not going to vote, but chose to vote for Donald Trump because he did not speak to them in that way. So they're calling it now. They're already saying that RFK Jr. could be a problem for Joe Biden still if he continues to garner support. She's Black said, like I said before, RFK and Marianne Williamson are basically raising money for the DNC. Heartland's Media in the House says, do not trust the DNC. Mika says Bernie worked harder for Clinton than she did. Right? Thank you for the super chat, Terry. Sabby, you rocked at May Day at Boston Common. Thank you so much, Terry. Thank you. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, and then we'll go to this story with Noam Chomsky. Oh, boy. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Anna. Where's the part where they still haven't released the Iowa 2020 primary totals? F, Alphabet, and the DNC. Thank you for the tip, Roger. When governments fear the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. Thomas Jefferson, I can't say that word on here, the slaveholding founding father, oh yeah, and third president. Also, people with integrity won't get picked. If they choose you, question their integrity, support party abolition, and run citizen-initiated constitutional amendments to disappear parties, and this goes away. That is something that you could be doing right now locally in your areas. I'm ready for the second batch of videos, Eric. We're going to go into the story here about Noam Chomsky and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, I've been covering this development that has been happening in reference to Jeffrey Epstein. We've been covering the connection that he had between JP Morgan, the connection that he had with politicians, his involvement in the Virgin Islands. And now there have been more recent developments that have emerged. Now, when I saw this on the Wall Street Journal, I said, oh, okay, some of his connections include CIA, totally get it. A Rothschild, totally get it. And then someone's name appeared that I did not expect to see, and that was Noam Chomsky. Let's get into this clip here from News Nation.
First tonight, the new questions we need to be asking about Jeffrey Epstein, because nobody else really is asking these questions. And when you do ask, you don't get answers. When you don't get answers, keep asking. He had effectively a double life, and we know very little about the bigger part of his life. We're not talking about the sex part here. The Wall Street Journal just reported that after Epstein's conviction on sex charges, schedules show meetings planned with William Burns, director of the CIA. Since 2021, he had 3 scheduled meetings with Epstein starting in 2014 when he's Deputy Secretary of State. Why is a Deputy Secretary of State meeting with a guy who had pleaded guilty to sex crimes involving minors? Catherine Rumlow,
I'm going to tell you why in a second.
A White House counsel under President Barack Obama, had dozens of meetings with Epstein in the years after her service in the White House. Leon Botstein, the president of Bard College, invited Epstein, who brought a group of young female guests to the campus. Noam Chomsky, professor, author, and political activist, was scheduled to fly with Epstein to have dinner at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2015. We don't know which of these meetings took place. We do know they were scheduled. That's what the Wall Street Journal.
Now, I want to pause here for a second. Woody Allen's name is also here, so you can see Woody Allen's picture. He didn't mention his name, so I wanted to mention it for you. But some of these people make sense. Now, he's wondering, like, why would a CIA official, why would Ariane Rothschild, CEO, banker, like, why would these people meet with him? By the way, this was after he was convicted, not before. So I'm going to tell you why. And then we're going to get to the Noam Chomsky part. Blackmail. I seriously believe, based on the information that I've read, I believe that Jeffrey Epstein had a lot of dirt on these people, whether they had been to that island that he had, or it just could have been other information that he had on them that they did not want the public to find out. Remember, they said he had several tapes as well. I really believe that he had something on most of these people. Now, you have Jeffrey Epstein, who was in the mix with the CIA. This guy was protected by the government. Remember, when he was convicted, that was not the first time authorities showed up to his place. You have to remember that he had been reported prior to. They showed up at his house in Palm Springs. Maybe it was Palm Springs. They showed up at his house in Palm Springs, searched the house. He was let go. Okay, was not the first time. You mean to tell me that if he was entangled with the CIA, you mean to tell me none of these government officials knew what was going on with this guy? I don't buy that one bit. Let's go on. There's so much more to show you.
Found Ariane de Rothschild, who's now chief executive of the Swiss private bank Edmond de Rothschild Group, had more than a dozen meetings with Epstein. Epstein scheduled more than a dozen meetings from 2013 to 2017 with Joshua Cooper Ramo, who at the time served on the board of Starbucks and FedEx. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak was reportedly a regular guest at Epstein's meetings. Epstein was scheduled to have dinner with them and movie director Woody Allen and his wife. Why? Sure, there are the...
Now, you have to remember some things about Woody Allen, too. Woody Allen, his wife, if he's still married to her, I have to look this up, but Woody Allen married his adopted daughter. It's really weird. Like they had a relationship. The relationship started when she was a teenager. So it makes sense that Woody Allen would be hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, man.
Accusations of sex with underage girls and the massages and all the sickening sex stuff that surrounded Jeffrey Epstein. That's largely been adjudicated. Nearly 24 of those women shared their stories in court after he died. But we know shockingly little about why the most powerful names in the world, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and so many others.
Here's the web of connections. Donald Trump, Bill Clinton, Saudi Crown Prince, Prince Andrew, Bill Gaetz, Kevin Spacey. Let me take the captions off so you can see. Kevin Spacey. You have Lex Wexner. You have Jess Staley, former Barclays CEO, former L Brand CEO, John P. DeJohnette, former U.S. Virgin Islands government. This guy was connected to very powerful people. Let's not forget, Kevin Spacey was actually accused of sexual assault here in Massachusetts over an incident that the accuser alleged happened at Martha's Vineyard. He was a teenage boy. So some of these people you expected to see, and you ask, where the hell does Noam Chomsky fit on this list?
Hung out with a relatively small potatoes money manager who appeared to enjoy the company of underage women. We still know very little about why people trusted him to manage their money, or why even after his sexual deviance became public.
Blackmail. It's not even about whether they trusted him. Blackmail. You let me manage your accounts. You let me manage this money for you. You can choose not to, but if not, I have this information on you that I can release at any time. Blackmail. That's the answer.
The rich and powerful felt the need to meet with him. Alan Dershowitz defended Epstein in that 2008 case that resulted in a year jail sentence. Epstein was originally accused of sexually abusing girls as young as 14. He pleaded guilty to a much lesser charge. But after that, think about that. After he pled guilty to being involved in some really unsavory activities, the world's most powerful and influential people couldn't get enough of Jeffrey Epstein. Alan Dershowitz joins us now, famed Harvard law professor and criminal defense attorney. It's good to see you, sir. I appreciate it.
This is the gentleman that Kim Iverson interviewed, and he said he wouldn't come back on because she asked him questions about Jeffrey Epstein. Apparently, he didn't want to answer those questions. Remember, Kim said that they reached out to her. She didn't reach out to them for the interview. But here he is ready to answer questions. Make it make sense.
What is the power that Epstein had that got so many people to check their better judgment at the door?
Blackmail. But listen to what Alan says.
Well, I think a number of factors. Before he pleaded guilty, which is when I knew him, nobody knew, as far as I know, nobody knew he had this secret life. The president of Harvard, many, many other people. He had seminars with Nobel Prize winners. They were interesting, and he was an interesting guy.
Nobody knew he had this secret life. There were other people flown to the island. There were other people flown to the island. You really expect me to believe that none of those people, no one, and this is not to say that Noam Chomsky did, but I'm saying you expect me to believe that none of these people that were friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who flew, especially ones who flew to the island. You mean tell me none of these people knew? If that's the case, why haven't they released the Black Book of Names? Why haven't they released the names? Ghislaine Maxwell, she's just a pawn. She was just a pawn. She was not the real catch here. The real catch is releasing the names. And that has not happened.
Some people, I think, were attracted to him because of his intellect, because of his charm. I think he had some things over some other people. I think he had some extortion over some people. I think some people may have come to him not for his great financial advice. I never thought he was that good financially. I never took financial advice from him. And I suspect there were people over whom he had something involving the sex stuff. Now,
it's called blackmail. I'm sorry, but he doesn't want to say the word, but I'll say it. So we're going to move on to another clip here. And this one is from Joe Rogan, because people are asking, like, why would Noam Chomsky, why would he want to, you know, be associated with someone like Jeffrey Epstein? Or why would Jeffrey Epstein want to be associated with people who are scientists? So I worked at MIT, and I actually agree with what this gentleman is going to say on Joe Rogan's show, why he went to that level.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
I guess this is an opportunity to bring up Jeff Epstein. So, you know, people sometimes wonder, you know, like, we're scientists, hanging out with him to get with these young women or something. I know scientists. There are some scientists like that. They were spending time with him because he was giving their laboratories money that they didn't have to write grants for.
Why was he doing that, though?
Oh, there are very strong opinions. I never met him. I know people who knew him. But he clearly understood social engineering. He understood that rich people they can get anything they want. Anything they want.
Yep.
Except the one thing they can't easily control is their reputation, because that requires other people's perceptions. And just being rich doesn't make you necessarily respected. By certain people, yes. By certain people, no. So he understood that very wealthy people feel more important and can derive more sense of self-respect when they're surrounded by brilliant people.
That piece right there. And this is especially true. People are going to take you more seriously if you're friends with people who are scientists, who are physicists. I worked at MIT. Some of the most brilliant people in the world teach at MIT. And when he mentioned the grants, when he mentioned Jeffrey Epstein giving them money for their labs and their research, it all goes back to the money, people. It makes sense. Listen, you only get so much money from these grants each year. I know this. I've seen this. There's the NIH grants that the government gives out. Like, you only get so much money. And eventually, if you want to continue your research, this is where the donors come in, right? So Jeffrey Epstein has made contributions to MIT. The president of MIT actually made a statement after he was convicted saying he was donating to MIT, but he was considered an anonymous donor. And there are several of those people who don't want to be named. But just because he was giving donations to the university doesn't also mean he wasn't giving donations to people for their research. Now, what's particularly interesting in reference to Noam Chomsky is that Noam Chomsky claims for him, that is actually not the case, that he did not receive money from Jeffrey Epstein. So then what was it really all about? You see, the Washington Journal, they published this article. And this was the bombshell that dropped the other day that had a lot of leftists kind of like cringing. Epstein's private calendar reveals prominent names, including CIA chief, Goldman's top lawyer. So if we go on here, because you could see the pictures at the top, and this is one that caught me. I saw Noam Chomsky and I'm like, why is Noam Chomsky here? So I want to go to the part that's about Noam in particular. Like I said, the other people to me was not a surprise. It's not a surprise to me that he would be connected to someone from the CIA or anything like that. What was a little strange was Noam Chomsky. Now, it says here, most of the people told the Journal they visited Epstein for reasons related to his wealth and connections. Like I said, it always goes back to the money. Several said they thought he had served his time and had rehabilitated himself. Mr. Botstein said he was trying to get Epstein to donate to his school. Again, money. Mr. Chomsky said he and Epstein discussed political and academic topics. Okay. This guy was mega rich. You can discuss political and academic topics with a number of people. I don't believe that was the only reason why they were connected. I'm sorry, but I don't buy that. So it talks about his connections to the CIA, the former CIA agent. And then it goes into this piece here. This is a long article, by the way. That's why we're just going to skip to the Noam Chomsky part. Let me just fast forward here. Of course, this part's like towards the bottom. Rothschild, she also met with him again after he was convicted. And that's the piece I want people to hold on to. It's not just about meeting with him. It's the fact that they were willing to meet with him after his conviction. That's the part that's a little strange. So there's Noam Chomsky. Mr. Barack also met Epstein in 2015 with Mr. Chomsky, now 94, a linguistics professor and political activist who has been critical of capitalism and U.S. foreign policy. Mr. Chomsky said Epstein arranged the meeting with Mr. Barack for them to discuss Israel's policies with regard to Palestinian issues in the international arena. Interesting. Mr. Barack said he often met with Epstein on trips to New York and was introduced to people such as Mr. Ramo and Mr. Chomsky to discuss geopolitics or other topics. He often brought other interesting persons from art, culture, law, science, finance, diplomacy, or philanthropy, Mr. Barack said. So it goes on here to say Epstein arranged several meetings in 2015 and 2016 with Mr. Chomsky while he was a professor at MIT. So at that point, 2015, was I still at MIT at that point? I think I was still at MIT at that point. So this is actually when Noam Chomsky was still employed at MIT, is when they were meeting, okay? When asked about his relationship with Epstein, Mr. Chomsky replied in an email. First response is that it is none of your business or anyone's. Second is that I knew him and we met occasionally. You see, this is the same kind of line that Bill Gaetz tried to give, which is just like, oh, we met, like we had dinner like once or twice. But Bill Gaetz' ex-wife actually said they were friends. And with your friends, you don't meet someone just once. So it's almost like they're trying to make it seem like they weren't as close to him as people would think. But they met more than once. They met a couple of times. In March 2015, Epstein scheduled a gathering with Mr. Chomsky and Harvard University professor Martin Nowak and other academics, according to documents. Mr. Chomsky said they had several meetings at Mr. Nowak's research institute to discuss neuroscience and other topics. 2 months later, Epstein planned to fly with Mr. Chomsky and his wife to have dinner with them and movie director Woody Allen and his wife, Soon Yi. Why was Noam Chomsky? This is an odd bunch, right? Woody Allen? Interesting. Now he goes on to say, if there was a flight, which I doubt, it would have been from Boston to New York, 30 minutes. I'm unaware of the principle that requires that I inform you about an evening spent with a great artist. Do you guys see a problem with his statement? This is Noam Chomsky's statement. First, he says, I didn't know I needed to tell you about this. I don't need to inform you about this. But given the fact of what Epstein was convicted of, and you met with him after he was convicted, why can't you talk about it? What is there that you're trying to hide? Epstein donated at least $850,000 to MIT between 2002 and 2017, and more than $9.1 million to Harvard from 1998 to 2008. The schools have said. In 2021, Harvard said it was sanctioning Mr. Nowak for violating university policies in his dealings with Epstein and was shutting a research center he ran that Epstein had funded. MIT said it was inappropriate to accept Epstein's gifts and that it later donated $850,000 to nonprofits supporting survivors of sexual abuse. In 2020 interview with the Dunk Tank podcast, Mr. Chomsky said that people he considered worse than Epstein had donated to MIT. He didn't mention any of his meetings with Epstein. So what have those people done? This is concerning. Mr. Chomsky told the Journal that at the time of his meeting, what was known about Jeffrey Epstein was that he had been convicted of a crime and had served his sentence. According to U.S. laws and norms, that yields a clean slate. My God. Out of all the people that you could have chosen to do business with, MIT said lawyers investigating its ties to Epstein didn't find that Mr. Chomsky met with Epstein on its campus or received funding from him. Harvard declined to comment beyond the report it published on its Epstein ties in 2020. So I'm going to say this, and then we have this video here that I also want to play because Fox News also talked about this. Max Blumenthal said at approximately the same time Noam Chomsky was wagging his finger at the Palestinian-led BDS movement, he was meeting privately with Barak, among the worst war criminals in Israeli history. The meetings were brokered by Jeffrey Epstein. Look at this. Noam Chomsky, Israel boycott campaign risk backfiring, says Noam Chomsky. And then this screenshot here, this is where Max posts a screenshot from that Wall Street Journal article. And it talks about how he met with Barak. And it said here, Mr. Chomsky said Epstein arranged the meeting for them to discuss Israel's policies with regard to Palestinian issues in the international arena, which I just mentioned to you. So, this is not to say, here's what we know and what we don't know. We don't know if Noam Chomsky went to that island. We don't know if he participated in any of those acts or if he knew about those acts. But what we do know is that this is somewhat suspect. Never mentioned this. Never mentioned it. It's kind of odd. And then this relationship here, which Max Blumenthal brought up, which I think is very concerning. Let me come out of this so you can see it. This piece here. Noam Chomsky, when he was wagging his finger at the Palestinian-led BDS movement, he was over here meeting with Barak, one of the worst war criminals in Israeli history. So this goes into, thank you so much for this. I was going to say this goes into some of the claims that people have made that Epstein was working with Mossad. So I have to say this. Who is Noam Chomsky? I know some people aren't happy to hear this news. I saw leftist meltdown on Twitter when this was reported. But this is why I tell you not to hero worship people. This is why I tell you not to put people on a pedestal. And I know a lot of people love Noam Chomsky. And they didn't take this news too well. So we don't know how much he was involved in reference to what Jeffrey Epstein was convicted of. We don't know right now. What we do know is that that black book of names has still not been released. And we know that he did have a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And had this article not reported this, we probably would have never known. That's just something to think about. The Oracle says sex, big money, and power always make strange bedfellows. Thank you for the super chat, Steve. Sabby, is there anyone who didn't meet with Epstein? Me. I'm sorry, me. And thank you for the super chat, Fire Faye. Have you thought about having Whitney Webb on your show, Miss Sabby? I bet she'd sit down for a chat with you. Love your work, by the way. Yes, I would love to have Whitney on. I need to actually work on that. But I do see that my guest is here. Jamal, whenever you're ready, just give me a thumbs up and we can get into the story here. You ready? Okay. All right. Let me go ahead and bring you up. Hello, welcome.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. All right, guys, my special guest is Jamal Abdali. He is a longtime community organizer, blogger, and essayist. He writes about politics, the economy, and Minnesota's Somali American community. Thank you so much. I've been wanting to bring someone on for quite some time to talk about this particular situation that happened in Congress recently. So I have a short clip that I want to play for those who are not aware. Matt Gaetz actually presented legislation to pull U.S. troops out of Somalia. I want to play a little bit of what he said, and then I want to pass it back to you, Jamal, because I know you know a lot more about this. I do want people to understand he is not calling for drone strikes per se to end in Somalia. His request was to pull the U.S. troops out. So I want people to get all crazy excited and like, oh, yes, he want all the warfare to stop there. That's not necessarily the case. So let's listen to this.
There are currently 900 U.S. troops in Somalia, give or take, and this resolution would bring them home. Somalia is a country of 17 million, tortured at times by al-Shabaab, a group of roughly 7,000 hardened fighters and even more sympathizers. But to believe any of the arguments, just logically, that my colleagues are making, you have to believe that 900 U.S. troops is what is going to save a country of 17 million from a hardened group of 7,000. I think that strains not only logic, but our understanding of the history of Somalia, a country that has oscillated between failed state and just absolute coup revolution over and over again, civil war, sectarian violence. The future of Somalia must be determined by Somalia. And to the extent that foreign influences could be helpful, I would argue that the African Union is far better positioned to build a stronger sense of national identity and national unity among clans that have been warring in Somalia for generations than U.S. troops.
Okay, that bit there, Jamal, please educate us all about this particular situation, because this legislation did not pass. And so our congressmen and congresswomen have decided not to pull U.S. troops out of Somalia. Please educate us all about this particular issue.
That's correct. So Congressman Matt Gaetz called for understanding of a Somali history. And I think it makes a little bit of sense to sort of start there. The current conflict in Somalia, which is very brutal and violent, is over 30 years old. And it can be break down about to 3 decades. You know, the first decade started on early 1991 when the central government essentially collapsed and plunged the country into chaos. And that decade was mostly marked with a brutal clan, sub-clan, fighting that just spread throughout the country. And this includes the 1993 incident of Black Hawk Down, in which the United States sent over many troops, but ended up leaving in a fiasco after a day of battle where hundreds of Somalis were slaughtered and about 18 American Delta Force were killed as well, and a pilot was captured, and that led to that whole movie and the book Black Hawk Down. But the United States left. Bill Clinton, who was the president at the time, pulled off all of U.S. troops. Then in 1999, around 2000, there was a conference in a one city state called Djibouti, just the north of, in which the inhabitants happens to be Somali, to bring together sort of civilians, people in a religious community, people in the elderly, the traditional elders, people with and other professionals were brought together to try to organize the state. And they established a transitional government in which the objective was to come back to Somalia, the city of, the capital, Mogadishu, and try to reestablish the state. But they were rebuffed by warlords who had all the guns and were refused to take over the capital and access real power. Then in 2006, the population, Somali citizens who were in Mogadishu, which, by the way, about anywhere 3 to 5 million people, were really fed up with the warlords. And in a very short period of time, they grabbed all their guns and kicked out and drive out the warlords out of the city. Then in that power vacuum, a new group emerged under the banner of a Islamic Courts Union that included a coalition. It was basically a coalition of religious groups that actually, for a 6 months period, brought the country in many parts, the majority of the country, in a very made it very stable, but for about 6 months. Then at that time, this is when the United States was about 5 years removed from September 11th under the leadership of George W. Bush, and the rhetoric of a global terror was running very high. But the United States was already involved in 2 theaters of war, Afghanistan and Iraq. So it didn't have actually a bandwidth or to send massive amount of troops to Somalia. So what it instead opted for was to basically subcontracted a war into Ethiopia under the leadership of TPLF. So then, United States supported them with funds and all the other things that were necessary. And that religious group, or the Islamic Courts Union, were crushed and dispersed, in which, by the way, had elements of what's known as Al-Shabaab today, in which the United States is using a justification of keeping troops in Somalia. But it did not exist in the current form, but it emerged as a direct result of United States policy that contracted a war to Ethiopia. And the Ethiopian Defense Forces at the time were far more organized and equipped and more effective. So in a very short period of time, they crushed and took over Mogadishu. And what that did was it led to a nationalist resistance and struggle to drive out Ethiopia, and which Al-Shabaab emerged as one of the most effective fighting force against Ethiopia's occupation. Then a lot of Somalis saw them as a means to liberate their country from Ethiopian troops. And Ethiopian troops were eventually driven out, and were replaced a African Union force to helped out some of the security elements. So in a nutshell, that's how we got where we are when Representative Matt Gaetz has introduced this resolution that did not pass. Did not pass, and it came to an end it went down in defeat. So the United States right now, according to is in an escalation mode. I think this is important. It is in an escalation mode of war in Somalia, and the reason is that Donald Trump withdrew all of American troops in the waning days of his administration, and they were estimated about 700. Then soon as he came to power, President Joe Biden, sent them back, and he promised that he was going to cap them at 450 troops. And that is what is described in the unclassified side of report. So, but according to Representative Matt Gaetz, as well as a Representative Ryan Zinke of Montana, who also has an oversight armed services responsibility through the Appropriation Subcommittee on Military and Construction, both confirmed that the number was was running at 900. Now, Representative Zinke went further, he and said actually more American troops is needed, and he listed in his remarks a type of a profession or skill sets that's needed, including aircraft mechanics and cooks and others. So if Representative Zinke's recommendation were followed, the United States footprint could be twice as large, if not more. They could easily reach to thousands. But even at the 900 level, they are being supported by fleet of Navy warships off of the coast of Somalia, including a not too far out a large base in Djibouti. So that's what the that's what the resolution sort of addressed, to withdraw American troops. But to your point, it doesn't call for a drone attacks as well as cruise missiles to be stabbed, in which at one point were so rampant that it wasn't killing any terrorists, but it was killing and livestock of innocent folks as well as real lives. So that's where we are, and that's where the resolution sort of started and ended.
Well said. I thank you so much for reiterating that, because it's important that people understand, because I've already heard people framing it in such a way to make it seem like Matt Gaetz is calling for, just end all of the conflict that's happening in Somalia. And that's not exactly the case. He's specifically asking to pull the U.S. troops out, not to stop the drone strikes, which I think is also problematic. From your perspective, in the United States, do you find, because I've found that a lot of people have no idea this is even going on. Like when I talk about countries like Somalia, or if we tell people about Yemen, like most Americans that I've interacted with, they have no idea that there's even a significant, conflict there, and that the U.S. government is involved in some way, shape, or form. Has that been the case for you, or do you find that more people are aware about the situation in Somalia?
Well, I think the American public is politically very innocent when it comes to these kinds of situations. There seem to be a next to nothing, in terms of awareness and demanding a explanation from their House of Representatives. I think by the time that these kinds of issues bubble up to the level of a massive American population awareness, by then it's very late in the in the event. To answer your question, I think awareness in the American public is very, very low.
Yes. How do you feel about Representative Ilhan Omar? I know she wrote a letter to Joe Biden about a year ago about the drone strikes in Somalia, but I haven't heard much from her since. In particular, I have heard when Max Blumenthal was on the show last time, he did tell me that apparently some of the people in her district that are also Somali American are not too fond of her right now. Do you feel that she's doing enough that she could, considering it is her home country?
No, I think in this particular case, though, the feeling here in Minnesota's 5th congressional district, which is centered around Minneapolis, with the largest, Somali population in the United States, is that she casted a correct vote, but gave for the wrong reasons. She provided, a sort of an approach that said, well, I'm okay with the troops being withdrawn, because had the, resolution passed, it would require the administration, the White House, to withdraw troops within a year. And her conclusion was that, well, within a year, the current leader of Somalia is doing such a great job of crushing, al-Shabaab, and it will be a moot point to talk about it. So that sort of was her, angling. And to your broader point of people not, being found, fond of her, is that she was in the, subcommittee on African Affairs of the, Foreign Affairs Committee before she was removed. And the feeling here is that, well, if she's not there in that, in that committee, why isn't she in other committees, like, for instance, the Housing and Urban Development? Homeless is a huge problem in Minneapolis. So people are asking those questions. They are asking a more attention and more engagement of hers at the district level. I don't think anyone I think anyone who's engaged in, in Somali politics, regardless which side they come in, they come down, it would be within the Somali take its own sort of political life. But to conclude this question of sort, she said this should not be seen as an alternative into an American policy towards Somalia. But the problem is she hasn't presented a cohesive and a coherent policy that she thinks the United States should be pursuing.
So I know, Eric, if you can you go online and check? I wanted to see if the article's up yet, but can you check the Gray Zone's website and see if there's an article posted just now about Somalia, and let me know in the private chat. But one of the things I know that you mentioned too, because I do have like a rough draft of it here. You and Ann Garrison talked about this, that the U.S. is actually promoting the division that's happening in Somalia because they are supporting President Hassan. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Ann Garrison has been doing a wonderful job in terms of covering, the Horn of Africa. And but I think the job of a independent journalist is such a daunting that anything from a analysis to a fact verification is it's just a lot of work. But I think Anne has been doing it in such a terrific job. So she and I had been collaborating some time, and a lot of the work on the Horn of Africa, and we just completed this article in the Gray Zone that I don't know if he went up live or not, but we've been working on it, quite some time, just not only framing and formulating what the issue is or the United States role in Somalia, but also what it means. It's not, I think, we tend to talk about people like Matt Gaetz and Ilhan Omar and, that are in the news, but, oftentimes the mainstream media misses the larger point of what the news means. So what we try to do is explain sort of, what the news means in the United States role in Somalia. So right now, the United States seems to be engaged in two efforts in Somalia. One of them is there is a brutal conflict in northern Somalia, in a Sol, Sanak, and region, Sol, Sanak, and Ain region. There is a secessionist group, which happens to be a result of the central collapse of the state, and the United States have been supporting and propping up that group for some time. And one of the drivers was that a United States was going to establish a base in the city of Berbera in northern Somalia. And this wasn't their support wasn't in exchange for such that, but that triggered a conflict between secessionists and unionists. And right now it revolves around the city of Las Anod, in which, thousands have been killed on both sides, and, many more wounded, but over 200,000 people displaced in the city of Las Anod. And so that's what's sort of going on in the northern Somalia, and the United States has its hand, and it's deeply involved, in that conflict. Now, mostly in the southern portion of Somalia, the United States have been propping up a deeply corrupt and a nominally functioning, central government in the capital city of, Mogadishu. The leader of that, government, President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, has come to a power into a sort of a shoehorn by the United States. United States explicitly want him, to come back to power. He led Somalia 2012 to 2017, and the Somalis weren't all that fine of him. Although they didn't want to see him, to come back to power. But somehow the United States and other powers, other proxy, powers of the United States want him. So he came back, and after a short period of time, after he came back, he announced this quote unquote total war against Al-Shabaab, which is a terrorist group that's affiliated with Al Qaeda. But there is no comprehensive strategy. There is no a public support either for him. In fact, a lot of Somalis don't see him as a as a legitimate leader. So he's been, but however, he's been framing all of his rhetoric and all his ask for United States for more funding and more troops and more arms from the United States. That's what he's been largely been doing. So that's the United States. I think President Biden just named a new ambassador who has been confirmed, but I don't know if he's ceremoniously taking office in Mogadishu. But a lot of the analyst communities think he's just going to pick up where his predecessor left off.
Interesting. It's just, God, the U.S. government has its hands in everything. We can't talk about countries in Africa or the global South without talking about the resources that exist there, because I continue to tell people that you need to pay attention to this because there's reasons why the U.S. government has its hands in certain places. So if you look at the major resources of Somalia, of course, surprise, surprise, oil. Oil is a big one. There's a big one. There's also gypsum and uranium as well. But I think the big key here, again, it's oil. It's the same thing in reference to if you look at why the U.S. is occupying a certain region in Syria, they're occupying the region that contains the oil. And it's just, how do you feel about, being here, living in the United States? How do you feel about what's happening back home? Do you still have family back home in Somalia, or is everyone here in the U.S.?
Oh, absolutely. No, I still have a family in Somalia, in various parts of Somalia. I recently, visited and go back frequently. And when I try to, when I do go back, I tend to ignore. I make a serious effort to ignore, some of the, the politicians and sort of the, political class, information. What I try to do is blend it in with locals to the extent possible, so I can get a feeling for, a sense of life at the grassroots level. So, I do that. I still have a family, and I think there's in a very. This is not, specific to me. It is also a common among, immigrant communities or among Somalis. There's a very strong connection. Now, you mentioned natural resources of Somalia, and oil being the prime of them, in which the United States seems to be explicitly interested in. Just recently, a few months back, Hassan Sheikh Mohammed has granted a contract to a American oil firm based in Texas. And it's I believe their name is oil exploration of something, and it is a relatively small firm that doesn't have a whole lot of capital or assets to drill oil in Somalia. So the oil issue in Somalia seems to be more of a countries and companies that are competing for a right to explore and drill it. So it's quite a ways off. But what is going on right now, or most of the issues that are going on in Somalia, are driven more of a strategic competition. The United States trying to drive out countries like, or at least to prevent countries like China and Russia and Turkey and others taking a foothold in Somalia. That seems to be one of the big things that that they're pushing. The base that we discussed, seems to be a part of that larger, strategic. Somalia, locates in the Horn of Africa, and it's a very strategic between the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, the Indian Ocean. It's quite a bit of waterways that can be controlled within the territorial of Somalia. So that seems to be the at least in the short term, what's driving a lot of countries to try to come to Somalia and establish a foothold, trying to trip up others of other countries that they compete with from a strategic standpoint.
Interesting. What is the perception of China in Somalia? Do people look at China as an ally or potential ally for them, or do they look at them as a competitor, or is it somewhere in between?
I think it's somewhere in between. If you talk to ordinary Somalis, the folks that that make up the majority of the population, I think you would be very quick to find out that the only friend that they believe the Somalia has is Turkey. Turkey is a very popular in Somalia. The United States, the United Arab Emirates, the Ethiopians, the Kenyans, a lot of the neighboring countries are all considered villains in the Somali culture here, at least in Somalia. China is obviously takes a very different approach than of that of the United States, which is more of an imperial approach. We're going to come in and we're going to crush anyone that opposes us, and we're just going to go ahead and take what we want. That seems to be the the track record of United States. China takes it in a different approach. It's more of a culture that's a less intense and at least at the service a less dominant. And if you look at some of the strategies like the Silk and Belt Road that are also being right now embedded in a lot of African nations, including next door neighbor Kenya, that seems to be their strategy. That they wanted to bring it in loans. They wanted to be able to use their financial muscle to essentially buy influence, but they don't bring it in troops. I think they do have some Navy ships that are also patrolling Somali waters, but it is not visible as as Somali as not visible as the United States. The United States is very visible and very, very, assertive when it comes to this. And anti-sentiment in the United States, in the Somali public, is very high. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is one of cultural. The Somalis happen to be a overwhelmingly, Muslim, Sunni with conservative inclination. And another, the issue of a United States unimpeded support for Israel offends a lot of Somalis. So that sort of puts United States, behind the 8 ball in terms of honest broker of anything within the in Somalia.
Is the U.S. support for Israel, or the U.S. constantly, choosing to back Israel, is it offensive towards people in Somalia because of the experience that's happening with the Ethiopian Jews in Israel?
I'm not certain about the Ethiopian Jews in Israel, but I think what people the Somalis identify with the oppression that the Palestinians are facing, and they're under the state of Israel. That's sort of what determines Somalis. They would compose literatures about they would compose songs about a championing Palestinian struggle, and that would have demonstrate about that would protest how the Palestinians are being treated. Now you have the United States within choosing to support Israel, and through that is where I think most of the inflections or most of the anti-sentiments in the United States is rooted.
Interesting. I'm curious, with everything that's happening right now with BRICS, where do you see this? Where do you see this going in reference to Africa? Because we know, like, South Africa is a part of BRICS. But I was just reading the other day that 19 other countries are actually interested in joining BRICS. Do you think this is something, when you look at the countries that are a part of not just Somalia, but a part of the Horn of Africa, do you think this is something that they may be interested in doing as well?
I think a lot would change in the case of Somalia. A lot has to change before it joins the groups or organizations like the BRICS. I think there has to be a more, stable resemblance, some sort of a resemblance of governance and control over the nation. But to your point, South Africa, which is the second largest economy in the continent after Nigeria, is part of the BRICS. And some indication or there's been some early indicators that they having Russia, for instance, within the BRICS is having is shaping some policies in countries that are either that wanted to be part of the BRICS or already in the BRICS. For instance, South Africa just decided to leave the International Criminals Court. And just unilaterally, left. So I think the BRICS is driving, or the desire to join other economic clubs that are, alternative to the G7 or, a Commonwealth in the European Union that, is having an impact, and it is shaping, some of the, political decisions in the continent.
Awesome. So guys, there will be an article. If it's not released right now, I think my producer Eric checked for it. Might not be published just yet, but Gray Zone is releasing an article by Jamal and Ann Garrison called U.S. Troops in Somalia Rise to 900, House Votes Not to Withdraw. So definitely be on the lookout for that article. It goes into a lot of detail. But Jamal, thank you so much for joining. And where can people, find you on social media, and where can they find your work?
I think I added my name to my Twitter handler. That seems to be works, wonderfully. And I love to connect with people that are not only, opposing, U.S. imperialist, but actually, offering an alternative and debunking some of the just bad theories that, for instance, if United States withdrew troops from Somalia, that somehow it would be taken over by militant groups like Al-Shabaab. I think what we have been, trying to engage in the at least that segment of the population, that what United States is doing in Somalia as well as other countries, okay, the policy that the practitioners are choosing is not helping. It is making things worse. It is having the exact opposite. And one of the things that we quote that article was a recent report from the Watson Center and the Brown University that essentially concluded that whatever the United States is doing in Somalia is helping Al-Shabaab, not hurting it. So I think that's a critical conclusion that if people look at closely, that they can have it, and that I would like to engage people more on that conversation.
Awesome. Jamal, thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, guys. I hope that was informative for you. And I also want to add, this is just another example of U.S. intervention and the people in that country being worse off after the U.S. has intervened. It's a common tale, and it's unfortunate that it's common, to be honest. But I hope you learned a lot from that. But again, that was to drive home to you, to let you know that just because Matt Gaetz was calling for those troops to be removed, that doesn't mean he was calling for them to end the warfare that's happening in Somalia. I want to be very clear about that. Very clear. Okay. I'll take that comment on Rockfin, Eric, whenever you're ready. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin, Roger. Didn't miss what you said. Universities and research and development get small grants from the government and have to depend on big donors. Yet our government is willing to give billions of dollars in tax cuts and government money to big pharma for R&D just for them to sell it back to us at enormous rates. It was government money in billions, perhaps trillions, that financed R&D. This proves that they have the money for universities. Yes, yes. And thank you for the tip on Rockfin. Anna, Julian Assange never hung out with Epstein. Way to go, Anna. Guys, let's give kudos to Anna. Probably the best comment tonight. Way to go. Does it mean to release that segment as a clip, Sabby? I will release all these segments tonight. But we are going to do call in tonight. I'm going to take a quick break. And then when I come back, we'll head on over to call in. I'm pretty sure you have a lot to say considering what we discussed tonight. But yeah, U.S. intervention is a mess, man. It's a mess. Look out for that Gray Zone article. It may post maybe late tonight, or if not tonight, tomorrow. But check the Gray Zone website and that article. You should see it there soon. So be on the lookout for that. That's Jamal Abadali and Ann Garrison that wrote that article. All right, Eric, I'm ready whenever you are. I'll be busy.
All right. Hello, everyone, on this Tuesday night. This is the part of the show where we give Sabrina a little break. And before we go into the call-in, I put the call-in link in the chat if people want to get a head start on that. And you can do call-in on the browser through the link. You can install call-in on your cell phone, search for Sabby Sabs, and it'll come right up. Now, let me see if I can bring up the call-in page, and we'll see what it looks like. So I think we're up to episode 101. Let's see. Dun, dun, dun. All right. Sabby Sabs call-in, episode 101, Chomsky Epstein connection. So we want to hear from you on call-in. Sorry, I'm reading Mastermind, which is always dangerous if you're on a live mic. Yep, my Honolulu T-shirt. Haven't been to Honolulu or the shirt, but there you go. Yes, red on red. And so in the call-in, we want to hear what you think, and not just about my shirts, but about the Chomsky connection with Epstein. And anything else that you want to talk about, whether you want to talk about the other stories, or if you want to talk about the Somalia, or whatever you think. Let's see. Yeah, we had this, there's one thing with RFK and, and Marianne Williamson and the Democrats. And there was one chatter, there was one chat that said that basically, from She's Black, just saying that, the RFK and Marianne Williamson are just raising money for the Democratic Party. And I thought I kind of agree with that. I mean, it's that whole thing of if you really want real change, what are you doing in the Democratic Party? And I remember when we were on the ground at the RFK event, and it would be like he would say like three really, really based, really good things, and then he would say like a cringe thing, and I don't know, man. It just seems like when you put the Democratic Party sauce kind of into the mix, it just kind of ruins everything, and I think it would just make a lot more sense to start a workers' party or to run independent, and just to run at it from that angle. From Pitchforks, Kennedy is Bernie 2.0, and it's I mean, there's some. I mean, there are some real differences, and that I will grant, and that there are certainly things that RFK is saying that excuse me, that Bernie would never have said, never will say, and so that's so it's a mixed bag, and it's hard to know how to read it. It's I guess having him in there in the primary and in the and in the conversation, instead of just having Biden roll through, I guess there's something worth in that, but yeah, it's the Kennedy Democrat, and they're really going with that. Like I got on the list because we signed up as part of like getting into the event and whatnot. So I've seen like a couple of their emails, and they're like they're pushing that. It's like, I'm a Kennedy Democrat, and I kind of agree more with Corey here in that, even Kucinich said they're all Kennedy Democrats. It's was kind of cringe. And Sabrina has posted the call-in link as the posted chat on there, so you can get in, so you can have that up there when you want it. And and the other thing I'd say is something I've been kind of thinking about trying to develop into a concept. Maybe is the idea of kind of a do the pivot of where talk about anything like this, whether it's Kennedy or foreign policy or Epstein or any of these things, but then always pivot to the real situation, the real control. What's the problem here? What's the underlying issue? And that is the money. Big money runs everything. And if we're not pivoting to that, if we're not coming off focusing to that, then we're never going to get anywhere because that's the key thing that needs to be solved. And it's until you get that big money influence out of politics, out of government, we're just going to be running around with the same problems, and it's going to be all the same theater and whatnot. And so then if you're recognizing that of the money is the big problem, not getting distracted by all these other issues, then you go to the next step, maybe the next pivot of what do you do about it. And if you're serious about dealing with the money, then it comes down to things like getting it out, and that is things like clean elections. That's like getting laws, getting regulations. I mean, there are even a whole slew of political and government regulations that have been wiped from the books. At this point, the bribery is legalized, and so we need to get serious about demanding that they stop serving the money. There's the interests of the 0.1%, the top 0.1%, and the rest of us. And we know which interests they're serving. And the puppet strings is the money. So, I think we could be talking about passing clean elections laws in every state, whether it's through ballot initiatives or pressuring the legislatures to do that. And, sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with a constitutional amendment to deal with money in politics, and with that just says that money is not speech and corporations are not people. And these are things we can rally around and try. And I'd like to figure out a way to build a movement around it, a mass movement around that. And with that, back to Sabby and onward to call-in.
That's right. We're heading on over to call-in. Now, in reference to what Eric was just talking about, I recommend everybody visit Move to Amend. Like, you need to visit this website. We'll talk about it more in the next couple of shows. But Move to Amend, they address the money issue. So I just put the link there in the chat, because that's the thing. Like, we can talk about the people, and I've said this before, you can talk about the people and we can talk about the issues with the people, but then you always have to get to the why. And why is it? Why is it that Noam Chomsky had this relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? Like, why is it that the DNC can just change the rules whenever they want to? Why is it that, they're making this decision now where the primary challengers are not even going to get the opportunity to have a debate with Joe Biden? Why is that? It all goes back to what Eric was just telling you, to the money. And I think it's really important that when we talk about like these individuals, we have to understand that all you have to do is swap them out with someone else and we'll still have the same problem, because we haven't fixed the core issue, which is the money. So we need a movement around that. And I just think that is very, very, very key. Like, you have to give people the root cause of the problem. And at the end of the day, the root cause, as much criticism as I have for Joe Biden, he's not the root cause. As much criticism as I had for Donald Trump, he was not the root cause. The root cause of the problem is big money interests. And this is why I've continued to talk about the banks, all the things that's happening with Silicon Valley Bank, that happened with JP Morgan, the history of JP Morgan, which I think a lot more people need to know and understand. A lot of these corporations, they just control so much. BlackRock controls so much in the world, not just in the country, the world. They own it basically. So until you understand where that real power lies and make that connection, then nothing is going to change until we're able to get to that issue. So swapping out candidates and swapping out commentators, that is not going to solve the problem. And that's what I want people to understand. Thank you for the super chat, Katie7. Soon Yi was not Woody Allen's adoptive daughter. She was Mia Farrow's adoptive daughter with Andre Previn. Oh, yeah, that's right, because they never got married, but it was still weird. Soon Yi Previn. Woody and Mia never married. Yes, it was weird, but it wasn't that weird. Yeah, he started a relationship with her when she was a teenager, though, not when she was an adult. That's the thing about Woody Allen. But Hollywood loves him, right? They love and praise Woody Allen. Interesting. All right, let's head on over to Call In, guys. We're going to talk about it. I'm sure you have questions and things to say. This is episode 101, Noam Chomsky Epstein connection. Let's cut to the chase. How do you feel about Noam Chomsky's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein? And we can talk about other stories that we discussed tonight as well. So you guys know how we do on Call In. We just shoot the breeze. All right, so head over there. Oh, thank you, Kill Your Gorgies. I like the color in your blouse. This is actually a dress. It's really funny. Like when you guys think I'm wearing a dress, it's actually a shirt. And when I'm wearing a shirt, you think it's a dress. But yeah, this is actually a dress. It's a whole flowy thing. Like, yeah. But thank you. So let's head on over to Call In. The link is pinned to the top of the chat. So I'll see you guys over there. I'm off tomorrow. I will be back on Thursday. And yeah, have a good night. Keep up the fight.